As was the case last month, I'm going to start this video off with a little bit of deck tech. This month I chose to play a mono-green combo deck. This is actually very similar to the first deck of Magic I built when immediately after Alpha was published in 1993. So as you can see here, the deck's got lots of elves and lots of giant growths. It's got the maximum number of berserks that you're allowed to play. And the general game plan is to dump several elves on the table on turns 1 and 2, and then attack with an elf and giant growth it 3 times, followed by berserking it to do a lethal 20 points of damage before the opponent has a chance to really do much of anything at all. I've chosen to run only 11 forests and 1 Mox Emerald because with all the elves to provide mana, I really only need to draw 2 forests / Moxes in the by the end of turn 2 to get started with all the elves. And by the end of turn 2 I'll have seen 9 cards out of 40, so I will have at least 2 around 90% of the time. Even if I only draw 1 forest, even then the deck can still function reasonably well because of all the elves. I chose to run a lot of elves, 12 as you can see, because in order to execute the plan I need to get several elves into play quickly on the first few turns so that I can have the 4 mana available to play triple giant growth plus berserk. Along with I need an additional elf to attack with. In addition, the early elves are often a target for an opponent. Lightning Bolt or Swords to Plowshares on turn 1, and the deck does almost nothing without at least 1 elf in play, so it's important to have some redundancy. I chose to play only 8 giant growths and 3 berserks, despite the fact that I often won't have enough of those cards for a lethal attack for several turns into the game, because I really wanted to leave room for all of the elves. An elf with no pump spell still attacks for 1 or provides mana for a hurricane, but a pump spell with no elves is almost completely worthless. You can use a berserk perhaps to kill an opponent's attacking creature by berserking it, but if I'm forced to do that, I'm almost certainly going to lose the game anyway. Of course, when actually playing a game, things rarely go exactly according to plan, so there are some other cards in here that I've added to help secure victory when either my opening draw is weak or my opponent does something annoying that interferes with my game plan. The most important of these other cards is Hurricane, which I run the maximum allowed 3 copies, because it's very often the case that giant growthing and berserking your elves and attacking for 1 damage each for a few turns, you can do in the neighborhood of 14, 15, 16 points of damage to your opponent before they stabilize with big creatures that you can't attack through. Icy Manipulators, Royal Assassin, any number of things. So it's important to be able to dump all of your pump spells on the turn right before you think your opponent is going to stabilize, and then be able to finish them off with a Hurricane. The Hurricane's also terrific against early Hypnotic Specters. If you're on the play with this deck and you lead with a Forest and an Elf, your opponent can Dark Ritual out a Hypnotic Specter, and on your turn 2 you can just play another Forest and Hurricane it away. Otherwise, Hypnotic Specter just eats away at your hand, and you have no chance to win the game because you have no chance to build up enough pump spells to be able to do lethal damage. Winter Orb is a real all-star in this deck. With the Mox and 12 elves, you really don't care that much if you can only untap 1 forest a turn, but typically you're going to have a lot more non-land mana sources than your opponent, and Winter Orb is going to be very close to a one-sided effect. Lastly, you can see we have Chaos Orb, and that's just in there because if opponent plays some random card like a Circle of Protection green or a force field that they can reduce damage from your unblocked attack creatures to 1. Who knows what they're going to play? You have some chance to Chaos Orbit away and still win the game. The last thing I want to talk about is the play patterns with this deck. It's very vulnerable to your opponent unsummoning your huge elf or casting a Swords to Plowshares on it, or terroring it. And so when your opponent has mana up and is threatening to do that, very often you simply attack with 3 or 4 elves, and your opponent's development has been stunted because they need to leave up mana to prevent you from giant growthing and berserking your elf for lethal, and so you are able to peck away for several points of damage, often getting your opponent down into the mid to low teens life points before you even use any of your pump spells. And at that point, with a handful of pump spells, you might even dare your opponent to kill one of your creatures at instant speed during combat. If you have a handful of pump spells and you attack, you can giant growth 2 of your elves, and if your opponent chooses to swords one of them using their only white mana, then you're threatening to giant growth the other one again and cast Berserk on it and do lethal. So there's a lot of maneuvering during the course of the game that results in the deck being not quite as much of a glass cannon as it might first appear to be. Hopefully we'll get to see some of these things I've described play out in the games with Steven that are just about to begin, and I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. Now on to the match.